Imagine standing in a room where every whisper is a death warrant, and the very walls have ears designed to catch the sound of your heartbeat. You think you know what it means to be powerful, but in the year 1327, power was nothing more than a sharpened blade held over your neck while you slept. History remembers King Edward II as a failure, a man who lost his crown to his own wife and her lover. But what history hides is the sheer cold-blooded precision of how a king is erased from existence. In the damp, dark corridors of Berkeley Castle, a man who once ruled an empire was reduced to a scream that supposedly echoed through the stone for centuries. Yet the most terrifying part of this story isn't the scream, it's the silence that followed. 3 years after the world was told the king was dead, the very man who guarded him stood before Parliament and looked them in the eye to claim he had no idea what happened. Lord Thomas Berkeley had sent a letter confirming the king's death with his own hand, but when the stakes changed, he suddenly developed a convenient case of amnesia. This isn't just a mystery about a murder. It is a masterclass in how a political purge functions, where the truth is a luxury that no one can afford, and where being disappeared is a fate far worse than being executed. You are about to enter a world where loyalty is a death sentence, and where the only way to survive a purge is to become a ghost before they make you one. To understand why Edward II had to die, you have to understand the mechanics of a purge, because it never starts with a killing, it starts with isolation. Roger Mortimer and Queen Isabella didn't just want Edward off the throne, they wanted his name scrubbed from the record of the living. By the time Edward was locked inside Berkeley Castle, he wasn't a king anymore, he was a liability, a walking reminder of an old regime that refused to stay buried. They moved him under the cover of darkness, shifting him from stronghold to stronghold, because a king in a cage is still a magnet for rebellion. Every few miles the guards would change. Every few days the rules would shift, until Edward didn't know who was a friend and who was a butcher waiting for a signal. This is the first rule of surviving a purge. You must realize that the moment you are isolated, you are already dead in the eyes of the state. Mortimer knew that as long as Edward drew breath, there was a chance of a rescue, and those rescue attempts were happening more often than the history books like to admit. There were 4 major plots to break him out, 4 times when the walls of Berkeley Castle were almost breached by men willing to die for a fallen monarch. Each failure only tightened the noose, and each attempt made Mortimer realize that a living king in a dungeon was more dangerous than a dead king in a tomb.
The pressure was mounting, and the air in England was thick with the scent of a coming storm. Mortimer was a man who understood that power is a zero-sum game, and as long as Edward lived, Mortimer's own head was on the chopping block. He needed a solution that was permanent but also invisible, because you can't just execute a king in public without turning him into a martyr. You have to break him first. You have to make the world forget him so that when the end finally comes, it feels like an afterthought. They stripped Edward of his royal status, they fed him rotten food, and they kept him in a cell built directly over a pit of rotting animal carcasses, hoping the stench and the disease would do the work for them. But Edward survived. He remained stubbornly alive, defying the filth and the cold, because even a broken king has the will of a lion when backed into a corner. This resilience was his undoing, because it forced his captors to get creative, and it forced Mortimer to send the order that changed everything. The instruction was simple and chillingly vague: remedy the situation quickly. And that is where the record turns to shadow. On the night of September 21st, the atmosphere inside the castle shifted from one of imprisonment to one of preparation. The guards knew something, the king did not, and the silence of the night was broken only by the sound of footsteps that didn't stop at the usual interval. In a political purge, the moment of the strike is never heralded by trumpets. It is heralded by a quiet click of a lock, and the realization that the people who are supposed to protect you are the ones holding the pillow or the blade. What happened in that room has been the subject of gruesome legends for 700 years, stories of red-hot irons and screams that could be heard for miles. But the physical evidence tells a much stranger story. When the body was finally displayed to the public, there wasn't a mark on it. No blood, no bruising, no signs of the horrific violence the rumor suggested. It was a perfect death, a clean ending to a messy reign, or at least that's what they wanted the world to believe.
But if the death was so clean, why was the funeral delayed for months? And why did the people who saw the body claimed it looked like a man who had been suffocated in his sleep, rather than one who had died of natural causes? The purge was supposedly complete, but this is where the mystery actually begins, because a purge is only successful if the ghost stays in the grave. Within weeks of the burial, rumors began to circulate that the coffin was empty or that the man inside wasn't Edward at all. People whispered that a double had been used, a commoner who looked just enough like the king to fool the grieving public, while the real Edward had been smuggled out through a secret passage during one of those rescue attempts. Imagine the terror of Roger Mortimer realizing that the man he thought he had erased might still be out there somewhere, breathing and waiting. This is the paranoia that defines a purge. It never truly ends, because once you start killing your enemies, you can never be sure you've killed the right ones. Lord Berkeley's later denial in 1330 wasn't just a lie to save his skin, it was a crack in the foundation of the official story. If he didn't know the king was dead, then who was in that grave? And who was the man Berkeley had been guarding for those final frantic weeks? The truth of a purge is that it relies on everyone agreeing to the same lie. But when the political tides turn, the lie becomes a liability. By 1330, Edward III, the boy king, had grown into a man, and he wanted revenge for his father's death. Or perhaps he wanted to bury the truth forever. He struck against Mortimer in a midnight raid at Nottingham Castle, dragging the usurper to the gallows without a trial. With Mortimer gone, the survivors of the old regime had to decide which version of history they were going to support. Lord Berkeley stood before the new king and the Parliament and chose a path of total confusion. He admitted to being at the castle, but claimed he was so ill he didn't even know the king had died, despite his own letter saying otherwise. It was a desperate move by a man who knew that in a purge, the only thing more dangerous than being a murderer is being a witness. You have to ask yourself, if the king was truly dead and the murder was ordered by Mortimer, why would Berkeley risk his life by lying about it 3 years later, unless the truth was something far more explosive than a simple assassination?
We are left looking at a jigsaw puzzle where half the pieces have been burned. We see a king who was hated, then pitied, then erased. We see a castle that became a tomb but might have actually been a gateway. The survival of a political purge depends on your ability to disappear, and Edward II might have been the ultimate survivor or the ultimate victim. The tension between what we are told and what actually happened creates a void that history can't fill. If Edward lived, where did he go? And why didn't he ever try to take back his throne? If he died, why the elaborate cover-up and the conflicting testimonies of his own jailers? The deeper you look into the records of 1327, the more you realize that the official story is a shroud designed to hide a truth that was too dangerous for the medieval world to handle. As we move into the second part of this investigation, we have to follow the trail of the man who wasn't there and look at the evidence that suggests the most famous murder in English history might have been the greatest escape act of all time. If the first rule of a purge is isolation, the second rule is the manufacture of a narrative that no one dares to challenge. But in the 14th century, a narrative was only as strong as the stone walls surrounding it, and the walls of Berkeley Castle were leaking secrets. For centuries, we were told the story of the clean death, the public funeral, and the grieving son. But what if the funeral was a theater production staged for a nation that needed closure? What if the body lying under that ornate alabaster tomb in Gloucester Cathedral isn't a king, but a decoy? To survive a political purge, you don't just need to escape the room. you need to escape the identity that made you a target. The most staggering piece of evidence for this theory didn't surface until centuries later in an archive in Montpellier, France. It is known as the Fieschi Letter, a document written by a high-ranking priest to King Edward III. In it, the priest details a confession he allegedly heard from Edward II himself. According to this account, the king didn't die in 1327. Instead, he swapped clothes with a servant, escaped the castle during a moment of chaos, and began a journey that took him across Europe as a hermit. This wasn't just a rumor whispered in a tavern. This was a detailed itinerary sent to the king's own son, claiming that the former monarch had traveled to Ireland, then to France, and finally to the mountains of Italy. Imagine being Edward III, sitting on a throne built on the assumption of your father's death, only to receive a letter suggesting your father is living in a monastery in Lombardy praying for your soul.
In a purge, the most dangerous weapon isn't a sword. It's the truth that comes back from the dead. If the Fieschi Letter is true, it redefines everything we know about medieval survival. It suggests that Edward II understood the mechanics of the purge better than his captors did. He knew that as long as he was the king, he was a dead man. To survive, he had to become a nobody. He had to trade his crown for a cowl and his palace for a cell of a different kind. This raises the question, why did Lord Berkeley lie to Parliament in 1330? Perhaps because he knew the king was gone. If he admitted the king had escaped on his watch, he would be executed for negligence. If he admitted he had killed the king, he would be executed for regicide. His only path to survival was the one he took: complete, baffling ignorance. But let's look at the mechanics of the escape. If Edward II survived, he would have needed help. You don't just walk out of a high-security fortress like Berkeley without someone turning a key. This points to a deeper layer of the purge, the double agent. History is filled with men who serve the new regime while keeping a foot in the old one just in case the wind shifts. There are records of a man named William Ockley, one of the king's supposed murderers, who vanished from England immediately after the death and was never seen again. Was he a killer fleeing justice, or was he an escort leading a hidden king to safety? In a political purge, the people you trust to pull the trigger are often the ones most likely to negotiate a better deal with the target.
The psychological toll of such a survival is almost unimaginable. To survive a purge by disappearing is to watch your own funeral from the shadows. It is to see your enemies celebrate your demise and your friends mourn your passing while you sit in a cold room in a foreign land, unable to speak your own name. There are records from the Italian town of Cecima that mention a holy man of royal bearing who lived in the local monastery around the time Edward would have been there. When he died, he was buried with honors usually reserved for the nobility. No name was ever officially given, but the local tradition insisted for generations that a great king of England rested beneath their soil. If this was the reality, then the purge didn't end in 1327. It transformed into a decades-long game of hide-and-seek. For Edward III, the possibility of his father's survival was a ticking time bomb. If the public ever found out the old king was alive, his own legitimacy would vanish instantly. This explains why Edward III spent so much money on his father's tomb, not out of love, but out of a desperate need to solidify the lie. A magnificent tomb is a heavy lid. It's hard for a ghost to climb out of 10 tons of carved stone. The more beautiful the monument, the more certain the world is that the man inside is actually dead. This brings us back to the ultimate question of the purge. Who wins? Is it the one who keeps the power or the one who keeps their life? Mortimer was hanged, drawn, and quartered, his body left to rot as a warning to others. Isabella, the she-wolf of France, ended her days in a gilded prison of her own, haunted by the choices she made to secure her son's throne. If Edward II really did escape to the quiet hills of Italy, he lived longer than any of the people who tried to kill him. He traded a life of constant fear and political betrayal for a life of anonymity and peace. In the cold calculus of history, the man who was purged might have been the only one who actually found freedom. The story of Edward II is a warning that history is not a collection of facts, but a collection of survived narratives.
We believe he died in Berkeley Castle because that is the version of the story that allowed England to move on. We believe the scream and the red-hot iron because it fits our image of a brutal medieval world. But the silence of Lord Berkeley, the mystery of the Fieschi letter, and the empty space in the records suggest a much more complex reality. Surviving a political purge isn't about winning a fight, it's about winning the right to be forgotten. As you look at the faces of those in power today, or the way history is written in real time on our screens, ask yourself, who is the person we are being told is gone? And what would happen if they ever decided to speak? The greatest trick a king ever played was convincing the world he was a martyr, while he was actually just a man walking away into the mist. The Purge of 1327 was intended to be a final curtain call, but instead it became a 700-year-old ghost story that refuses to die. Because in the end, you can kill a king, you can steal a crown, and you can burn the records, but you can never truly kill the doubt. And it is that doubt that keeps the name of Edward II alive long after his enemies have turned to dust.